Pencil Kings, 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 Pencil Kings.
You just have to kind of think about it as like a life and death situation. If I do not get this done, I'm going to be stuck at my day job forever.
Back. It's Wednesday, and it's time for another episode of the Pencil Kings podcast. Today, we're talking with one of the rock star members of the Pencil Kings community, so I'm really happy to welcome Liz Gera to the call. Hi, Liz. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
That's great to hear. Now, the reason why I wanted to have Liz on is because I think she is such a great example, not just of the Pencil Kings community, or not just for the Pencil Kings community, but for artists anywhere, about how taking action can lead to... Well, you just don't know where it's going to lead. But I see a lot of people who are stuck. They just think, I'm not good enough to do the thing that I want to do. I have to, before I can do the thing that I want to do, I have to learn this other thing. And they just end up in this hamster wheel where they don't produce anything. They don't move forward for years and years and years and years. And I don't want you to be stuck. So, Liz, can you tell people, just give us a 1-minute overview about what you work on and what kind of art you do and what your background is?
Oh, certainly. My background, I went to the art instruction schools up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I graduated from there with an associate's degree in illustration. So illustration's kind of like my favorite thing to do, and right now, through the help of the Pencil Kings community as well as Illustration Lighthouse, I'm getting my portfolio all revamped and hopefully going to be going into horror movie poster design. So it's like I love everything creepy and spooky and anything kooky. And so that's what I kind of hope to do. But I've done everything from storyboarding, comic books, book front cover illustrations. I've done a little bit of everything. But illustration for sure is my favorite.
All right. And recently, or fairly recently, you went to the Fort Collins ComicCon. Mm-hmm. And we've had a few people on before that have done Comic-Cons. Some said it's an amazing experience. Some said it wasn't so amazing. There's Comic-Cons happening all over the place. Your grandma's probably thinking about hosting a Comic-Con if you haven't talked to her for a while. There's so many of them, and they're all different. So you can't say that just because one is like X that the other one's going to be the same thing. What was the Fort Collins Comic-Con like for you? Could you just give us a sense of sort of like how big it was and what the flavor of it, if you could make it tangible with audio for us.
Oh, sure. This was the second year that Fort Collins had a Comic-Con. The year prior, I also had a booth there, and it was one day only, really small event. But second year, they expanded it to 3 days. They had two big celebrities there. One of them was Gigi. She was Chiana for Farscape, and we actually sat right behind her. And so it's ever growing, and they actually sold out of tickets for Saturday, I believe it was. So it's ever growing, but it still kind of feels like more like down to its roots, like more wholesome, versus if you go to another very popular convention here in Colorado. It's called NandesCon, or NDK, and that's an anime convention, and that has just blown up to become something akin to the anime version of San Diego Comic-Con. It's just gotten ridiculous. While the Fort Collins Comic-Con still feels kind of close to home, you still get to mingle and mix in. Just doesn't feel too overwhelming. And it's also much, much cheaper. Like for booths, both years, it was only $50 for a booth, while for NandesCon, you're talking $175. So if you're wanting to get into Comic-Cons or any conventions at all, I mean, there's anime conventions, comic conventions, horror conventions, anything, sci-fi conventions, BlizzCon, you name it. Starting out small is actually the best way to kind of get in, get your feet wet, get more comfortable, and then start saving up and moving on to the bigger things if you could definitely afford it and make it there too. Okay,
so I know before the con you're really busy because this isn't your full-time job being an artist. You already have a full-time job, you have a family. I feel like anybody with a family I have so much respect because you're so busy, and I don't know how you manage to juggle all the different things that you do. I always feel too busy, but my hat goes off to people with kids. what were you prepping for the show, and what did you bring, and how did you set up your table?
Let's see. What I did is on my free time, well, I just like downtime when I just want to kind of like turn my brain off but still be creative. I like to knit, and I also do needle felting. And that's a form of art, I guess you could call it, where you take wool roving in any kind of color you need, and you have this barbed little needle, and you stab that wool a bunch of times until it starts forming shape. So it's almost like sculpture. And I would actually make these small little Pokemon Sumu Sumu. I'm sure people are familiar with the little jelly bean shaped Disney Sumu Sumu. You see it like Target and stuff like that. I really like Pokemon, so I decided to make little Pokemon Sumu Sumus out of needle felting because it was just I could just sit down. I have it on my lap and I just stab this thing and kind of shut my brain off. It's crafting is easy art for me. So if I want to relax, that's what I did. And they were a huge success. The first year I went to Fort Collins Comic Con, I had 62 Pokemon Sumu Sumus and I was sold out by 2 p.m. So they were a huge hit, and I'm like, yes, this is fun. My son loves it. I give him away as gifts, and I could also sell these for some extra revenue because, extra money is always a good thing, especially when you like to do art on the side, and art supplies are expensive. So this is just my fun little way to kind of hopefully make some extra income, and it's just so fun. And so I made a whole bunch of those for the first and second year. For the second year, I brought in 125 Sumu Sumus, as well as art prints. The big thing with conventions is you go into the dealer room, and there's just rows and rows and rows of other people like you selling different things. And you want to stand out to the crowd. So the Sumu Sumus, it's Pokemon. Everybody freaking knows Pikachu. There's even Pikachus running around screaming, getting their pictures taken. So the Pokemon, the little Sumu Sumus, they're the eye catchers. You got to have something that grabs people's attention. They're really popular that year. And this year, Pokemon Go was really popular. And so those were awesome to grab people's attentions. But then I also have art prints on the side. So it's like you got a grabber, you're more likely to sell like the really popular thing, but that at least that brings people over to your table. And so they could go, oh, what's this? And I had a Doctor Strange print, and I had a Mystique print, and other fun things that so you have your passion in there, which is the illustration, little prints right next to the big sellers, hopefully.
And in terms of sales, was Pokemon as hot this year as it was last year? I feel like it might be saturated because it was so big. I feel like the time that you went to the convention was when, in September, maybe?
August 26th.
Yeah, and when did Pokemon Go come out? In June or
June,
July?
It was in the midsummer, I want to say it was.
Yeah, so they were a hot seller the year before, but now this year Pokemon exploded in a huge, or at least for that period of time, I feel like Pokemon Go was still going strong.
Oh, totally.
So how did it work in terms of sales this year compared to last year?
For this year, it was kind of interesting talking because when you're a vendor, you look at all these other tables, and of course they have the same ideas as you. They are going off of the Pokemon craze. But you can't really look at them as your competition. They're your allies. If you have to run to the bathroom for an emergency, they could watch your table. If someone runs out of dollar bills for change, these are your allies, not your competition. And everyone goes at things a different way. And so with that, it was also a tough year. The previous year, I sold out by 2 p.m. This year, within 2 days, I maybe sold like 15 or 20. It was just a rough year, and I asked everybody around me too, and they said it was also a mediocre year for them because the Fort Collins area, it's CSU, Colorado State University, is homed in Fort Collins, so it's a big college town, and price of living just went up. Price of everything went up. And so it was just kind of a meh year. Your best case scenario is breaking even. And that's exactly what we did. But the Pokemon certainly did help. Anybody who had Pokemon anything, they drew people in, and hopefully they made sales. And sometimes they did or they didn't. So it was kind of a tough year. But it's just a good way to bring people in. And at least, if anything, you could always give them your business card, and they'll remember you for when they do have money. It was just because most of our clientele are college kids, and at the time they're broke because rent just went up $400. It's the economy. What can you do sometimes?
Yeah, that's amazing that it would impact things that much. I would kind of feel like a smaller purchase like that should be. I feel like it's kind of falls into that impulse buy category, and I'm surprised that that would be affected by the rent increase.
Well, and there's a majority of like families there too, and the kids they'll go to the first booth they see and want to spend everything, So by the time they get to you, normally their allowance is gone.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of wondering if it's like the con is bigger, so there's more. Did the exhibitors also, was there a lot more exhibitors this year than last year?
We were in the same room as we were the year before, and it didn't feel that much more cramped as the year before, so I don't think there were as many. I know there are plenty more like people showing up, actual participants, but I
Huh.
think booth wise, it was the same number because you can only fit so many tables in that stadium.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so back to juggling all this stuff. So you got the full-time day job, and you doubled your production. We'll just we'll just talk about you as if you're a Pokemon factory and an art factory, but in a joking way. But so you're able to create a lot more. How are you able to prioritize that versus? I feel like it's so easy for life to just come and like smash whatever aspirations you have with an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
There's just all these emergencies that come up all the time. But how do you say no, or maybe you can't say no to a lot of them? But how are you able to actually get your stuff done?
I just don't have a whole lot of free time. Like during that time, I go to work early so I could get off in time and drive all the way back down to pick up my son from school. We would come home, and I always give him an after school snack. And we have like an hour and a half of just break time before I have to do his homework and get dinner ready. And during that time, I would just sit down and needle felt. I played very few video games, or if I saw, I had to watch people play video games, like I would just put on YouTube Let's Plays in the background while I worked. Get my son's homework done, get him fed, get him bathed, put him to bed, and then after he went to bed, it's just straight up work. So I just don't have a whole, I think it's like free time, but I'm actually working on the stuff that I need for like the conventions or for my portfolio. It's like I prioritize some things, which can be kind of detrimental to your social life, but dang it, I get things done.
Yeah. And while you were doing that, how late were you staying up? Like how much time do you think you actually had per day that you were leading? Let's say when was the real push? The last 2 weeks, or was it the whole last month before the convention that you were really
It was
working?
like the week prior to the convention. It was like, okay, I gotta get these to the printer. I gotta go all this stuff, So that week beforehand was really the final push to get everything collected and done.
Okay, well that doesn't sound too bad then. 1 week of, we'll just call it a hell week.
Pretty much,
Um,
yeah.
one hell week, and then you're able to go and exhibit and meet all these people and connect with fans, and I don't think that sounds too bad.
I mean, because I knew that ComicCon was coming around, and I schedule out things. It's like, oh, it's in mid to late August, but the months prior to, I still want to have 3 Sumus done a week. Let's say in the beginning, like in April and May, do 3 Sumus a week leading up to, so that way I'm not having to do a whole bunch of all-nighters. And because I scheduled my everything out so far in advance, I had a good kind of flow going. So by like that last week, it's like, okay, I really want to get just these few more done because I have to put in orders for different colored wools that I can't buy in my state. I have to order them online and have them shipped to me. So it's like, oh, I can't do any Bulbasaurs until I get the shade of green in. But if I at least work on the ones that I can do with the stuff I have in stock, then if you're constantly working throughout the year, it's like, oh, something's not due until December. Well, don't wait until December to do it. You got to start doing it in June if you really, unless you want to do it like 4 nights staying up and not sleeping.
Right. And I think that's so important, is just having that schedule. But then having the schedule is one thing. I'm great at making grabbing Excel and writing out all these great plans, but not so great at sticking to them. Was there any kind of tips that you could give us that helped you? Because There's a lot of things, a lot of projects that just fall by the wayside. It's the graphic novel that you never, you do 2 pages of it and you never get it done. It's the web comic that you did 2 panels and you can't get the third one done, or whatever it is. But how are you able to stick with your schedule beforehand? Because and then you had 1 week of crunch, but it sounds like going into that things were going pretty well.
It's just determination. I don't know, because I mean, if you sit there and it's like, I really love art, this is what I want to do full time, but then you sit around your butt and you watch daytime TV, it's like you gotta have some kind of system to really push yourself. Like, even there's some really nice apps you could put on your phone that will give you, like, oh, this deadline's coming up. You give yourself deadlines. And if you're really, really serious about something, like, I hate my day job, I want to do something more, I want to do something for me, it's like you just got to have that determination. Use apps, use sticky notes, make deadlines for yourself, do whatever it takes, because everyone's different. For me, it's making lists. I love making lists. And by the end of the week, if I could go through and check everything off on those lists, it means I am good. You have a planner with you every day. And it's just, you have to finish those things. And if you really, really need an extra kick, if you're unmotivated or anything like that, it's also good to have like friends or family that'll say, hey, if you don't get this thing done, you owe me $50.
Have you done that before?
No, luckily I haven't really felt the need to. It's just sitting there at work at my day job, and I'll just be sitting there, and it's like, if I just pushed that little extra more, met the right person, sent out this kind of email, I wouldn't have to be sitting here at this job that's driving me crazy. It's just having to go to work every morning is kind of my motivation, or having to see my husband go to work and he completely hates his job. And having to see him go to work is something that he hates to do. It's like just seeing, and just every morning when that alarm clock goes off, it's like, if I push that much harder, I wouldn't have to listen to this buzzing alarm every morning.
Right. I think that for me, that was a huge motivation that I felt in trying to get out was the vacation days. I just felt so trapped that I had to kind of beg people for these vacation days, and I only had 2 weeks out of the year. And it was like 1 week was spent going home to Canada for Christmas, and then I had a week that I could use for other time. And I think it's just the way that the U.S. specifically is really set up to be, you get your 2 weeks and that's where you start.
And at my job, we don't get vacation.
Yeah, it's insane. So I can really relate to that feeling of wanting and using that. We'll just use the word hatred. I don't like to use that word because it's so strong, but that hatred or that anger or whatever it is, that's such a great motivator to stick with it.
Totally. And you just have to find what motivates you. Like, oh, it's been a really, really rough day. If I just get the dishes done, then I could reward myself with my pint or a glass of my favorite beer. It's like you got to find your own reward system that works for you, because everyone is different. I just have this pie in the sky goal, and just sitting at work at my boring job staring at screens and working for the man for a low wage with no vacation or anything like that. That's my motivation to keep working and get the jobs in the art field and do something that I love to do, and working for me so I could get away from the day job. You just gotta, whether it's food or money or, having to pay out to your brother because you didn't do something, you just gotta find what works for you and just stick to it.
Yeah, I found the thing that worked really well for me was what I call denial goals. So there's the thing that you want, like, I don't know what the big toy or the big game is this year for Christmas. Actually, no, I do know what the thing is for me right now is Sony PlayStation VR. I would love to get a VR system. I'm so excited by it. But I feel like it's a bad example because it's so expensive. So let's just drop it down. But it's a game or something that you could easily buy. It stings a little bit when you buy a game. But if you deny yourself that game until you get that big project done that you're, getting your stuff ready for, or once ComicCon is done, then I can buy the game. But until then, I can't. And if I somehow wuss out and I don't go to the Comic-Con because I didn't get my stuff done and I just forfeit my table, then I can't get the game at all. And so by denying myself something that I know that I can get right away, I found that really motivating. But let's get back to what you're doing now for your next project, because I know that you're working. You're a huge horror fan, and you have a horror podcast. So, if anybody's listening and you love podcasts, what is the name of your podcast, Liz? Like, I can't remember what it is now. Terror Troop?
Yep, it's Terror Troop. Right now, we're
Okay.
kind of on a hiatus. My dad had a heart attack back in May, and so he's kind of had to prioritize. But we have over 130 episodes for you to go back on and listen to. So you got plenty of stuff to listen to. No worries there. And we will certainly pick it up here in the future. But Terror Troop, our motto is we watch it so you don't have to. We try to delve into the indie horrors, the B monster movies, the hammers, the crazy, you never even heard of kind of stuff. That's the stuff we like to watch. And sometimes we find gems. Other times we sit there and slowly ruin our livers with booze.
So now you're working to develop your portfolio. You're working with more clear direction for your next step. And can you tell us a bit about that? I hope that there could be somebody listening that can connect with what you're trying to do and maybe open some doors. I'm not sure if we're able to successfully use the podcast for this yet, but I want it to happen. I want to start putting it out there more into the universe. So just tell us a little bit about the next step.
Oh, certainly. Well, I've just pretty much been following the steps through Illustration Lighthouse that you and Shane Madden put together. And even though I went to art school, they didn't teach us business. And part of being able to earn enough money to do like freelance full time is part business. And that's what they lacked teaching us in art school. And you guys are definitely making up for it. So it's a matter of putting together a portfolio that is distinct and direct. It's like you just look at 3 images and go, yep, this person does this. Instead of like your DeviantArt page or Instagram page where it's just a big flockle of mess, because if you email that website out to people, they don't know how to hire you. It's like, oh, I want to be an illustrator, but yet you have everything from, like photographs and Photoshop stuff or vector stuff and logo designs. It doesn't make any sense. So it's just a matter of getting together a distinct portfolio that looks great, but also is very focused, and then contacting people, just doing it. You're never ready until you just do it. Just like with conventions, it's a great way to meet people. It's a great way to network. You learn things, you pass out a bunch of business cards, and maybe if you're lucky, have an extra $25 at the end of the weekend. It's the same with a portfolio and trying to get out there into the freelance job market. It's like, here I am, I'm ready, I'm going to do this anyway. Just make sure you have a professional look, you have stuff that looks nice, and business cards are always good.
But for you specifically, like, can you tell us a bit about what you're working on and what you're putting together and how you're approaching it?
So what I am doing is I put together a very long list right now. It's a list of 165 names of people in the business. And these are people I've met through the podcast Terror Troop, because we've talked to writers, directors, actors, all different kinds of people in the horror community. And it's a pretty tight-knit community. And so you just put together a list of contacts. And after you have your portfolio and your website looking all nice and pretty, then you email people, you contact people going, hey, I saw your tweet, you're working on this brand new movie. I'm so excited for that. I loved your previous work. Here's my portfolio. Is there anything I could do to help you, like DVD covers or movie posters or anything like that? And you just do that for everyone you meet. And then later on, unfortunately, convention season's kind of over, especially for horror. But the next horror convention coming up here is one in March out in Pennsylvania, and I'm planning on flying out there to Pennsylvania to go to this horror convention and just talk to people and show off my portfolio, because just you have to get out there. Throwing stuff into a room or your little small little cubicle doesn't get you anywhere. You actually have to be out there talking to people. And so my next step after I get my portfolio finished is just to talk to people, email them, tweet them, go to conventions, anything you could do to get your name out there. And, hopefully they'll get back to you. And if they do, just build on whatever they say and just keep doing that until your first job comes around.
So with your portfolio now, like, how are you approaching that different, and how are you, again, balancing the time? Because I want more people to take action. And you're one of the action takers. And I don't know if it's just something that you naturally do. Are you setting it out like you were doing with the ComicCon, where you say, okay, well, I'm doing this for my portfolio, so I'm giving myself this 2 weeks to finish this one piece and 2 weeks to finish the next piece? Are you working on multiple pieces at the same time? Are you having to go in and study for things that you don't know how to do, or you want to maybe up your skills a little bit? Can you walk us through how you're approaching that and getting all this stuff done?
For my portfolio, I already have two pieces done. Like during the class, I set up, it's like, okay, I want to be a horror movie poster designer. I want to bring things back to the 70s, like you remember the old Up From the Depths or Basket Case, or, you're walking down the aisles of good old Blockbuster and you just wanted to rent a movie just off of the cover alone. It wasn't the same boring old Photoshop stuff. I want to bring it back to the heyday of handmade art that grabs your attention, makes you want to watch, even if it's the worst movie ever, it just looks cool. So that's what I want to do. So I sat down and I came up with 4 movies that would be a good example of like my artistic spread. I chose Jaws, 1974's Magic, starring a very young Anthony Hopkins. I also picked The Witch, which is brand new. It's pretty popular. People will definitely notice it. And Demonic Toys, because during my research, getting together a list of contacts, I found out that the Full Moon Entertainment people, they're the ones who did Puppet Master and Evil Bong and a whole bunch of B horror movies. They're in need of an artist because their previous one, I think, quit or something like that. So it's like I picked those 4 because it's like you could do it simplistically, you could do it pretty realistic and detailed, but it would be a really good spread to show what all I could do. So I sat down and said, okay, here's my 4 movies. I'm going to start sketching out designs for all of these movies. If all of a sudden an inspiration hits, I'll start, I'll work on The Witch until inspiration hits, and I'll work on Magic or anything like that. But then once I had my finished concept sketches done, then I would sit down and only work on one. So right now I have Magic and Jaws finished, and I'm currently working on both The Witch and Demonic Toys at the same time, because both of them use very similar color palettes, and I do these all in traditional media. I do it with gouache paints. So if there's a lot of like similar colors, instead of having to remix color palettes, I'll just work on the 2 at the same time. Work on one until, I put that off to the side, and while it dries, I work on the other one, and back and forth and back and forth.
And are you doing it the same way? You just work on it after work?
Yep. After work, when Tristan's taking a break, or especially after he's in bed. My husband works nights, so he doesn't get home until like 10:30. So from 8 o'clock until 10:30, it's constant work. I'll be down in my art studio. It's nice to have a spot where you could just focus, turn off the TV, maybe put on some music or a podcast if you could multitask, but it's good to have a space. I just go into my space, I close the door, and that is time to just crank it out until my husband comes home or I start falling asleep. So, because you have to sometimes, especially with these, if your schedule is so crazy, you just have to kind of think about it as like a life and death situation. If I do not get this done, I'm going to be stuck at my day job forever. You got to really make it a priority. It's not like, oh, I'll work on it tomorrow, but tonight, oh, the election's going on, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, you got to sit down, maybe have something on in the background, but you really got to focus and you really got to get stuff done. Otherwise, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's so true. There's a guest that we had on a little while ago, Dorian Vallejo, who was encouraging people to burn the boats. And basically, I've thought a lot about this because I felt like I'm scared to give advice like that, because I feel like somebody would say, come back to me and just say like, Mitch, I burned the boats. I just quit my job when I full-time arted for a year, and now I'm bankrupt and all these bad things happen. It was just this downward spiral, because art isn't a surefire thing, but it's far better than feeling like you're trapped.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, especially for us, because we just recently bought a house, and I have a little kiddo to take care of, and my job is kind of cushy, although it's very monotonous and dull. But I'm lucky enough that I could sit there and draw while I'm running tests, because I'm just a software tester for HP. So I could sit there, and while stuff is running, I could draw on the side, because my boss, he's amazing, and he has one of his sons is a tattoo artist, so he knows that artsy type, So I could just sit there between tests and I'll draw up freaking whatever, Diablo for his birthday or something. And he's completely fine with it. So I am able to work at it a little bit at work, but when I'm at home, it's like it's time to get stuff done. You really gotta prioritize things, and if art is something you want to do, you really have to prioritize it. I know it's like, ooh, sleep or this video game or that video game. It's like, you gotta make sure you schedule it in your every freaking day. Otherwise, it's just that dream is gonna go away.
Yeah, and I think the last thing that's really important to point out here is the scheduling part. Mm-hmm. And I found for me it was really difficult to, when you're bouncing around or you have some element of freedom, that you think of your evenings as free instead of your evenings as work time. Mm-hmm. If you think of it as free, then it's like, well, sometimes I work, sometimes my friend calls me and I do this thing. That's sort of a very slippery slope where you can very quickly find yourself not producing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you got to kind of look at it too. It's like, oh, I have a day job, but then I also moonlight. It's like, this is my second job.
Yeah, and having that routine just allows you to really, go to your space, and I really love that too, having that place, because I find whenever I move, I'm often like bouncing from place to place. I lose weeks of time by changing locations because it's just my routine has to completely change, and it's so unproductive. All right, I think we're about at the end of this. Do you have your website up yet? Or if you don't, what is the URL going to be? Because once we release this episode, I'm sure you'll have it up and ready to go. So if somebody wants to go and hire you to do horror or scary or twisted related, I feel like, I've known Liz for a while, and I feel like if you pitched her with anything horror, scary, or twisted related, she would be interested. But where can people go to check you out online?
Oh, sure. My new website is elizagera.com, and that's where I have all my spooky, scary stuff. But then I also have lizgera.com, and that's more of just a fun catch free-for-all thing. So it's like anything I do on the side that's not spooky, scary, I throw on there. But Eliza Gera is my main one right now.
Awesome, and I can't wait to have you back and hear an update on this story. And actually, one of the last things that I want to just point out here that's started to come up again and again on these episodes, and people will say it, and it goes by so quickly that it's very easy for it to pass you by. But it's people, you do you is this phrase that I've just had in my head for so long recently, that you like horror movies. You have a podcast about it. You love watching horror movies. That's your jam. You're not trying to be something that you don't like. You're not trying to draw My Little Pony or cutesy, whatever things. You make Pokemon almost, I feel like it's almost like just something to do with your hands while you're doing something else. But you had a period where you did like Pokemon, but horror is your jam.
Mm-hmm. I still like Pokemon. I actually have a Pokemon tattooed on my arm, and it's a scary ghost type Pokemon. So the Pokemon Tsumasumas, those are just to make money because they sell.
But I think it's so important to just go after that thing that you like and that turns you on. And I applaud you for doing it. And anything we can do to help you out, please do reach out, because, like I said, I want to have you back and hear the success story of the horror poster career.
Oh, certainly. Cross your fingers. I hopefully hear back from the Full Moon guys, and I'll be their new cover artist. That would be awesome.
All right, well, that's it for us. If you would like show notes, you can go over to pencilkings.podcast and check out Liz's site. Is it, Liz, I just want to double check here, ELIZagera.com?
Yep, that's it.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Scope demands patience, skill, years of practice.
Ah, you talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.